Welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Mitch J. I'm here with Trick Slattery, George Ortega, Nick Vale, Chandler Klebs, and Michael Walsh. In recent podcasts, we've talked about how, although it's difficult perhaps to have religious belief and still reject the notion of free will, there are certain perspectives on reality that are compatible with free will skepticism. We talked a lot about pantheism and things similar to pantheism in recent podcasts. Today, we'd like to focus more on atheism or a lack of belief in God, so a more naturalist, materialist worldview. So where do we start? So maybe we can go around and we can talk about the scientific method first of all, so we can see how everyone feels about what science is capable of doing, and if there's anything more that we need beyond science. So I'll start by saying that from my point of view, the way the scientific method works is that we're trying. It's all about empiricism, right? We observe the world, and we are trying to accurately describe the world around us. We are trying to be able to predict future events, and we want to build models. We want to build better models. I personally am an atheist because I think that this concept of God is just a social construction. It's full of a lot of superstitious nonsense, and sometimes it conflicts with scientific truths. Furthermore, I see no reason to presuppose God exists, and it doesn't seem to add to the model. It's just a word. Like the word universe already exists, and I think it satisfies some of the criteria that a more nuanced version of God possesses. So I don't think we really need this notion of God, and I don't certainly don't think it's true. Furthermore, I don't think it adds more. It just raises more questions and doesn't produce a better model of what already exists. So what do you guys think?
Basically, in terms of like whether we need it, we have to look at the history of the terms universe and God, and we have to acknowledge that the concept of God preceded the concept of universe. So, then you might say, well, do we need the term universe? And then in terms of our understanding of the universe, our scientific understanding, before 1964, if you would have asked any physicist whether the universe had a beginning, the observable universe, they would have they would have ridiculed it. I mean, like it was theorized by this guy George Gamow about 60 years before that, but it wasn't until the 1964 something where they
Well,
actually found the background radiation. And so now all of a sudden you've got a universe with a beginning that coincides with the religious belief that there was a beginning to the universe. So
well,
so a lot
George,
of
just to say one thing, what I'm saying is everything makes sense without the concept of God. God doesn't contribute to the discussion. It
all right,
doesn't add anything.
the
It
one
doesn't
thing
help
that
explain.
Mitch,
Yes.
it does. For example, before 50 years ago, we thought what we were observing out there in the universe was all there was. That we were observing everything. Now we understand that there's this dark matter, dark energy that comprises 96% of what's out there. So we can only observe through our science 4%. So now, if you define God as transcendent, as like maybe quote unquote immaterial in a certain sense, yes, our understanding of the universe coincides with that conventional, traditional understanding of God.
Wait
Yeah,
a
Yeah.
but
second,
Yes.
George,
Go
because
ahead. Jump in, please.
dark matter and dark energy are things that are going to be scientifically discovered eventually. And if you're trying to put God's existence in this unknown bucket of what we don't understand yet,
Out of
what are you going to
depths.
do when science one day figures out dark matter? Oh, dark matter is an elementary particle that very weakly interacts with the standard model, but we found it out. Is your God picture going to go away, or are you just going to point to another mystery after that?
Well, yes, and there's always more mysteries. In other words, like there's the mystery of what created the Big Bang. God can't, science can't answer that.
Well,
You
that's the
know,
God. Well, here's the point, George. That's the God of the gaps. So what I'm saying is that that's it's not a really strong way of arguing. It's often described as a logical fallacy, right? Just because we know something doesn't give room to this really mysterious, ambiguous notion of God. But what I'm trying to say is, if someone has investigated the issue of free will and has become skeptical or has rejected that idea altogether because they think it's an illusion, they think it's incoherent, they think it's impossible, whatever. This is very compatible with a naturalist, atheistic point of view. In other words, what is this thing that God is supposed to contribute? Does saying the universe is God help us understand gravity? No.
what?
Does it
Well, all
help
right.
us understand dark matter? No. You're just saying all of a
But
sudden
Mitch,
that that's God.
it helps us understand that if we're puppets, nothing is up to us. What is making us do what we do? It helps us understand that question. In other words, like, how can we assign consciousness, intelligence to a puppet? We have to assign it to the puppeteer.
We could just say that's the universe. We don't have to say God though,
I know, but the term God preceded universe. Why change?
because
Because it,
universe is a scientific concept. God is a religious concept.
There is no scientific problem concerning who should we attribute consciousness to. That is not a problem. So I don't see what this problem. You might be a problem for
there
you,
is a
but
problem. No,
that
no.
is
I
not
mean,
a scientific problem.
if
There are no scientists going around saying, we don't know who to attribute consciousness to. That's not a
Mitch,
scientific
the reason why it's not a
problem.
quote unquote scientific problem is because the vast majority of scientists are either they're mute on the issue, they just don't say anything, or they believe in free will. So if you have this mistaken, idea of reality, sure, you're going to attribute consciousness and intelligence to a puppet. Whereas,
Um,
like, if you're like you'll attribute it to the puppeteer.
well, I disagree. I'm saying scientists are not concerned with attributing consciousness to something. Scientists are concerned with understanding consciousness,
Then
not
wait a minute. Why,
attributing
why do
consciousness
scientists
to something.
attribute consciousness to human beings, and then there's the debate of whether other animals and plants and stuff are conscious or not?
I
Yeah,
don't know.
they
Go ahead.
attribute consciousness to the things that are conscious. They just don't
Okay.
attribute to things that lead to those things that are conscious. There's no need to attribute something else besides the things that are conscious, besides the people or the animals.
Right, but that's where I would argue. In other words, science goes for deeper and deeper, more fundamental levels of truth. And I would say, like, if you have a consciousness, but because of this no free will principle applied to everything, that consciousness doesn't fundamentally belong to the thing that's manifesting it. You have to at least presuppose, or at least consider that the consciousness actually belongs to whatever's pulling the strings, whatever's
Well,
making
See,
things happen.
that's similar to saying that that whatever's pulling the string has ears and eyes. It does, just because we have ears and eyes doesn't mean that the things that precede that build to us have ears and eyes. We have these things because we evolve these things. Same thing with consciousness. Same things with our brain. Same things with everything we possess. You could say that it's causally arises from these other things, but it doesn't mean those other things have the same properties as what we have.
They may not have them, but they have to have, in other words, the concept of hearing and sight and taste had to have existed before the evolution of the
But
actual
again,
No,
organism.
it
I'm
didn't.
saying
that's total. No, how could it have existed before? And also, another question is, if there is an intelligence that's guiding everything in the universe, why doesn't this intelligence make rocks dance around and animated? Why is it only things with brains, evolved brains, that can act and behave like we would expect sentient conscious beings to? Why can't the trees just start dancing around? That would be
Well,
possible under your view, right, George?
actually, Michael, if you know something about the brain, basically there's a huge filtering mechanism. We have our brain is perceives so much information, but most of it is filtered out. Whereas if you take an agent like DMT, then yes, you will see trees and rocks dancing. You will see reality that none of us see because our mechanisms, our biology filters that out.
So
So
are you
yeah,
Illusions.
are you saying that when you're tripping on hallucinogenic drugs, that is what reality is?
Well, I'm saying that so many people who've had that experience, and there's so much commonality in that experience, you can't just say it's a quote unquote hallucination in
But
that person's
It,
mind.
it is because we understand the chemical components of
Right.
all the psychedelic drugs, and we know how they affect the brain, and they know that they take certain areas of our brain that deal with the imagination and our perception, and they mess with them, and they make us see and hear things that aren't actually there.
That's what I'm saying. But the reason, the mechanism behind that is that like our brain contains a huge filtering mechanism. There's so much information that our brain, accesses, but we only process,
But why would we need to be high on DMT or any other drug? Why doesn't the universe that is guided by a supreme intelligence, why doesn't it just make rocks get up and start dancing around in the same way that humans do? If everything is controlled by a puppet, why is it such that only living things with evolved brains behave like we would expect living sentient beings to behave?
Um, well, because like, or for example, we're only aware of 4% of what's out there. So like, within this 96%, we don't know its character. We know it exerts a gravitational force, big deal. So do we. We don't know anything about its psychic, dimensions. We have no idea of what it is. Who's to say that it doesn't have, that these kinds of worlds, these kinds of like
But
phenomenon don't
that
exist there.
But that's not answering the question. I'm asking you about why doesn't this universal intelligence that you say is controlling us human beings and animals and making us do intelligent things, why can't it make inanimate matter like rocks and water do and act intelligently? There should be nothing preventing it since it's controlling everything in the universe.
Basically because it designed what is it's capable of locomotion, what's capable of reproduction, what's capable of doing certain things, and what's capable of doing
So are you
others.
saying that this intelligence is constrained by the laws of physics, or is it the laws of physics themselves?
It created the laws of physics, and then yes, it's constrained by those laws that it creates. Absolutely.
But it can't change them? Why can't it just change them anytime it wants?
I don't think it can. It may be able to. I mean, it could. In the next instant, this universe might be gone, and a new universe might replace it. That's conjecture. I don't know.
I don't know. I simply just think it doesn't make logical sense, your
Again,
view.
so let's think about gravity, for example. The notion of God, saying God exists, or God is gravity, or God is the universe, and that's the fundamental property of God, which is the universe, does not better our understanding of gravity whatsoever. And that's why it's an anti scientific claim.
Actually, it does, Mitch. You know why? Because like we have a theory for gravity in terms of how gravity works, but we haven't yet detected either
No, no,
gravitational
see,
waves.
you're missing the point. Listen, listen. I'm saying concretely, what additional claim can you make just by saying God exists? What is the extra thing that you can put in? So okay, let's say God exists. What's the extra claim now that you can make about gravity?
Or actually, the extra
Nothing.
claim is that the universe, that everything has been designed. It's not
No, no, no.
arbitrary.
That's not. No, no, no. Again, that's just authorship. I'm talking about a scientific idea. For example, could you then say, therefore, therefore, E equals mc squared is incorrect? Could you then say, therefore, I now know more about gravitational waves. Now I know, oh, therefore white holes must exist. That's how the scientific method works. When you introduce a new theory, it has to contribute to overall understanding of science. New theories have to be able to explain more than the older theories, and they have to have evidence. Science is not about authorship. Science is not about calling things. We used to think about light in a certain way, and eventually we said, okay, light is a wave and a particle, whatever. But we didn't just say it's a wave and a particle. It's because there was strong evidence to show it acts like a particle if we think of light as a collection of photons. And we could think of light as waves if we thought about the way light waves propagate through the void, the vacuum of space. So there was significant evidence that showed, okay, light can behave like a wave and it can behave like a particle. This helps us explain this phenomena. Forget the old model. Here's the new model.
All right,
By
when you
saying something is God, all you are doing is giving a label. you are not saying anything scientific. There's no contribution there
Mitch,
Yep,
if
but
you
he's
were if you were going to relate that to gravity, I think I could agree. I don't think you need God to explain gravity. But if you relate that to our podcast, to our mission of leading the world to a new consciousness, of explaining to people that we don't have a free will, then basically the question is if, and this is a scientific question, if our consciousness, if our thoughts, if our feelings are not up to us, are not caused by us fundamentally,
Good.
what are they
Let's get
caused
to that
by?
question. Okay, so let's answer that. So yeah, this is. I'm glad we've recentered this. Is Nick still there?
Yeah.
See, okay, I'd like Nick to chime in a second here. Let's go back. So that's one of the overarching questions of this crusade that we all seem to be on. If so, human beings, as human beings, right? We have weaknesses, we have emotions, we have chemicals running through us. We're not just machines. We're not just purely logical beings. We have psychological needs, deep emotional needs. So George is, George, you pose a very important question. For many people, they have this conundrum. If it's not up to me, if what happens is not up to me, who is it up to? So here's
Right.
one perspective. From the secular perspective, the non-theist, the atheist, the agnostic, the non-religious person says, no one. The end. Period. It's not up to anyone. Agency is just something that makes human communication easy. It makes it easier to talk, to communicate ideas by saying, the light bulb fell. I cut the cheese. It's raining. The tornado blew down the house. But in actuality, we know that all of these systems we talk about, the tornado, the house, the knife, they're all made up smaller systems, right, that are infinitely more complex. We could talk about them on a cellular level. We could talk about them on a subatomic level. We could talk about quarks. So agency is just something we use to help us communicate ideas on a certain macroscopic level. But in reality, there is no thing. There is only the action, as Nietzsche said. There is no agency, there is only the action. So the simple answer, whether it's satisfying or not, is that it's not up to anyone. There is no thing. There is no mysterious thing doing anything. Things happen, and that's it.
Nick, what's
Okay,
your
but
take?
if a human being does something, can you say my quarks made me do it, or my atoms made me do it,
If you want to, that's the
or
point.
my
It
chemicals?
depends.
So where did
Right.
those come from? Where did the chemicals and the atoms, come from? Had to come from somewhere, right?
The Big Bang. That's where all matter originated from.
And what created that? The George and I are calling God as the great unknown of what everything. That's the only way I can define it. I mean, it's a word I use as a figure of speech to say it's not up to me. It's either in God's hands or it's God's will. I've done everything I can. It's not up to me, but I know nothing is up to me. So therefore, by deductive reasoning, if there's no free will, you guys are the most likely people to actually believe it. Anyone who doesn't believe free will should be much more like God than the surprised that there's so many people who don't believe in free will who are atheists. Because by deductive reasoning, if there's no free will, it's got to be the will of something else. I
it
don't
doesn't
see
have
what's
to
so
be the
difficult about it.
will. It doesn't have to be the will of something else, though.
It is the will of something, because how many times does something happen in life where you say, or you're in a hospital and someone's dying and the doctor says, I've done everything I can. He's been in 30 surgeries, whatever. And you look to, your friend is dying. We say, well, it's God's will then, or it's in God, or the doctor says, listen, I've done everything. It's a figure of speech where the doctor says, I've done everything we can, and it's in God's hands. What does that expression mean to you if there's no God? I don't understand why you would say that, or
It
why
means
anybody would
nothing.
say
It's
that.
just a figure
Yeah.
of speech to us.
And if a doctor said that, then
It
they're
means
probably
nothing.
religious.
It means it's out of our. It means nothing. It means everything. It means it's out of our control. There's nothing else we can do.
Well,
Which
just
I hate
because
to break the news to you is all of life.
Just because humans do something or say something doesn't mean it's rational or correct. It just means that's what humans do. I mean,
Well, it's not our will, which you all agree it's not. Then what are you attributing everything that happens to? The will of
but
what?
like I said, there's a simple answer. There's
the laws of physics. It's the laws of physics and the universe, which
But another answer, the simpler answer is no one.
Anyway,
All right, but Mitch,
the
Mitch,
point
the problem.
the point of our show and the point of the podcast is to refute free will. I don't see how arguing of whether or not God exists or not is helping our
No, this
customers.
is
You
No,
know,
I'm
important.
not trying
Nick.
to argue God's existence. I'm just trying to say that.
yeah, but it's not really the topic of what we're the
No, dude,
movement.
it is the topic, Nick, because basically, we've got to wait 5-10 years for people to catch up. In other words, and like we've got to be patient. They may not understand this for a while. So while they're understanding this, we're asking the question: if stuff isn't up to us, what's causing us to
Oh,
do
so
it?
you're
And
saying it's better for marketing to say everything's God's will so they'll get it?
no, no, well, I mean
That
yes,
would be
but
a good
that's not what we're
marketing trick.
doing. Yes, but that's not what we're doing. We're basically at the cutting edge of this science. We're basically trying to understand. In other words, science doesn't just predict. Science tries to understand the causality of things. What is causing what? What is causing what?
I
Why is
disagree.
whatever?
Wait a
I
second.
disagree with what.
You can't prove or disprove free will with science. I mean, that's impossible.
Sure,
The
you
only way
can.
you What?
Sure, you can. I mean,
No, you can only
causality.
prove it. You can only prove it with logic. But the only way I've told you you could prove it is if you and I had a time machine and we went back in time and pressed a button and everything happened exactly the
That's
same way as it happened.
nonsense. That's
Well, I mean,
nonsense.
what
The
other way
law of
could you?
the law of cause and effect is a scientific law. It's a
I know, but
scientific.
what other way could you prove it?
That's the only thing. You just need causality. You don't need anything else. Causality is a
And by the
scientific
way, the
concept.
time machine couldn't affect anything that would happen. In other words, you and I would go back in time, and it would have to be exact same without you and I changing anything. Obviously,
You
by
have to
going
understand
back.
that science is not limited to the scientific method and empiricism. Science has these a priori, a posteriori axioms that basically that are so prevalent
Would prove it,
that
but other than that, I don't see. What other way can you prove it?
We have 35 years of
It's a
empirical
hypothetical,
neuroscientific
theoretical
data.
argument we're making.
It's not completely true. We have 35 years of neuroscientific data showing that brain always causes mind whenever a decision is made. So that is proof, or something very close to proof from science, showing that the conscious will is not what makes the decision. The brain makes it, then the conscious will responds to it. And we have the laws of physics from quantum mechanics understood at every single thing in our everyday level, and there's absolutely no room for a soul or a will or consciousness or anything immaterial to have any kind of causal influence on the atoms and quarks in your brain, in your body, and anywhere else in the universe.
Why is it
well,
so hard to
Michael,
say that nothing causes Sorry, why is it so hard to say that no one is responsible for anything? Why is that
well, I
so
mean,
difficult?
if you use the term
I'm still saying you
responsibility,
cannot scientifically prove free will or not prove free
No,
will.
no, but I'm saying again, answering the question, the central question. If free will doesn't exist and what happens is not up to me, who is it up to? Answer: no one. Agency is just something used to make human communication easy.
It's the will of the universe. It's the laws of physics that are causing
Okay,
everything.
but I'm giving you an alternative though. Just
I
say
never said it was a person. It's the laws of physics causing everything.
It
Well, I'm
causes
saying it's
everything,
There's
but it's,
absolutely no reason to call that God.
Well, I do. So that's I can
no,
do
wait,
whatever I want.
no. Basically, God
Based on my
defined-
personal history, that's what I call it.
God, as defined in the Abrahamic, tradition, is the creator of the world. Well, guess what? The Big Bang had a creator. It didn't just come into existence.
But George, to you, God is the universe. In the Abrahamic view, God exists outside from the universe and creates it in the same way that a carpenter creates a table or something like that.
Right. So there's
That's not
two
your
ways
view.
to understand this. Like, in other words, like God, yes, God both is the universe and God transcends the quote unquote observable universe. So yeah, I mean, like it's seeing it from different senses.
but if we postulate a multiverse scenario where our universe comes from the black hole of another universe, it's like calling that other universe God. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, no,
that universe is no more God than our own universe. It just happened to be that is what output our universe.
Nick, Trick.
So that would be an infinite regress. It would just always be one universe starting another universe. You wouldn't get anywhere. It would just be an infinity in reverse, right?
But that's what we're stuck with anyhow.
Postulating God, if you're postulating God, then you're postulating either an infinite God or something that just popped into existence. So it's either way, you have the same problem.
Exactly, but that problem solves the problem of creation. In other words, our universe did not create itself according to what they defined God as several thousand years ago. God is what created the world that we know.
Right, so it could be another universe.
God obviously. I know, but Trick, if you say that, then the answer would be, well, God is what created, the entire series of previous universes,
It
and
could be
God
an
is what
infinite regress, like I said. It could be an infinite regress of universes.
right, and it probably I mean, I wouldn't say it's an infinite regress of universes. I would say that God is infinite. Yes, whatever created the Big Bang, and you're right. Maybe it could have
George,
been
I've
an
told you
infinite.
I have a problem with the Big Bang because you still never answered the question: what did the Big Bang explode into? So
Forget that, Nick. There's some of these
well,
things that we don't
it doesn't make any
understand.
sense. You're
We
saying
don't
it's
understand.
scientific.
But dude, it doesn't have to make complete sense to
That's
make
what I'm
scientific
saying.
sense.
God fills the gap for everything that doesn't make sense. I use it as a word to say I don't know. It's just it's inexplicable. So it's God.
But by doing that, you're going to confuse a lot of people with the Abrahamic God, which is the most popular God in Western
Fine, but
culture.
then what created God? You could still have it. You'll still have an inexplicable.
I've got a really simple answer. God doesn't exist at all. So then you don't worry. Then you don't
We
have to worry
created
about these.
God.
Yeah, then you have to don't worry about these
All
things.
Oh
right.
wait,
So
George, George.
Makes it a
if
lot
it's
easier.
not human will, it's the will of blank. Fill in the blank. If it's not,
No. Well,
Will is a technical term. I mean, we don't say that rocks have a will, for example. We say that humans have a will. So when you say will, you have to
okay, but
actually.
we use the word in English to mean, if I say, it's God's will, I what I tend to say is it's out of my control because anytime I'm in a situation where I've done everything I can to do something and I let go, the doctor or whatever will say it's either in God's hands or it's God's will. Since I know there's no free will, nothing's in, that's a human English expression meaning it's out of my hands, it's out of my control. But since you and I and George and everybody here knows that nothing is in our control, therefore everything is God's will. You take that expression for everything instead of just I've done everything I can and let go, which is what a normal person thinks it means.
But I don't even know what you mean by will in that context. Do you just mean causality
It's
then?
out of my control. In
All right,
that context, it's an idiomatic expression or
if we
just a common
if we want
figure
if
of.
we want to define will scientifically,
Yeah, but I'm
we
looking at
could
it as a figure of speech. When you
if
go,
you if we want to cut it out, if we want to define will scientifically, for example, there's these four fundamental forces. Everything that we know in the universe is controlled by the quote unquote will of these forces. What these forces, these forces make things happen. I think we can very linguistically, rationally, use will in that sense.
or we could
That's
just
not how we
not.
normally use will, though. It's usually used in the sense of conscious will, like some consciousness.
Yeah.
No, I
Only
know, but like
agency
the
and
way we usually
intentionality.
do a lot of stuff, our usual understanding of so much of the universe, including free will, is mistaken. So basically, part of what we're trying to do is we're trying to arrive at accurate, precise definitions of will, consciousness, all this stuff.
Hey guys, this has been totally crazy, and I'm pretty sure I agree and disagree with all of you on something. But yeah, first of all, about the will thing. When people use the term, will, when people say, like Christians and Jews or Muslims say something's God's will, they literally mean that there's some kind of human-like being that wants things to turn out a certain way.
No, they don't say human-like being. There's nowhere in the Bible that says human-like being.
But here's the deal. They claim that humans are made in the image of God.
Well, everything is made in the image of God. Why wouldn't humans be?
Hmm?
Everything is made in the image of God.
George, I agree with you more than you think here, but here's the deal. Look, here's the deal. Because I grew up in a fundamentalist type of Christianity, and here's the deal. The idea is that they're teaching humans are made in the image of God, but the other animals and the plants and all that stuff was not. And so I definitely think that you could say that we're all made in the image of the universe if you want to, but the problem here is that the monotheistic Abrahamic religions are anthropocentric. I hate anthropocentrism that focuses only on humans, and I'm afraid that by calling the universe God, you're still in a sort of way promoting the anthropocentric view without realizing it. But at the same time, I'm totally open to these discussions about will and consciousness and intelligence. And so it's very tricky here. But I want to bring it back to this thing here because basically the perspective of no God. Many people become atheists, and that's because they grew up being taught a certain religion. It might be Christianity or Judaism or Islam or something. And then, so there is an idea of what God is to them. There's a very clear idea in their minds since the time they're children and their parents have taught them this stuff. They've gone to church of what God is. And as soon as they start finding logical or scientific problems that conflict with that God as described, then they become an atheist because they either have to redefine God into something that's completely irrelevant to what they were told God is, or they have to conclude, well, the God as I was taught does not exist. And I think that atheism is very valid because we're just saying there's no like for me, God was literally some type of the biblical God that just spoke things into existence in a week and created the planet just by speaking and weird stuff, the dirt man, the rib woman, all that stuff in Genesis. And so it's very accurate to call myself atheist by that definition. And I suppose it could be argued that that's just one definition of God by one religion, but because it's dominant, that's why I think Mitch and Trick are concerned about the use of the word.
But Chandler, apply what you just said to science, to our understanding of the universe. Until 1960, we believed in the steady state theory of the universe, that it was always the way it was. We got that completely wrong. Until, a couple hundred years ago,
But George,
hold on. We
yeah.
believed that the Earth was the center of it. So my point here, Chandler, is yes, you're right that the people who, several thousand years ago said stuff about God, they were right about some things, they were wrong about other things. That's the exact same thing in science, except in science, we've been wrong about much more than religionists have been wrong about God. In other words, we've made countless mistakes that we've corrected. So in other words, if within science we give science the opportunity to evolve, to become more correct, more precise, why shouldn't we do that with our understanding of
Well,
God?
science is based on logic and reason, the scientific method, empiricism, evidence, predictability, building models. Science, it's been said by many people many times, it's our best explanations for the world around us. It's the culmination of our fairest, most intellectual efforts. There is only science. If you try to come to a conclusion if you're going to say there is religionists and there's scientists, I have no interest.
No, that's not what
in
I'm saying, Mitch. I'm saying, Mitch, what I'm saying is we should apply these scientific principles and reasoning and method to the question of God.
I'm saying what you're missing is that there only is the science. And if it were science, I'm saying of course, science would include, right? Trying to discover the nature of reality. But so far, there's been nothing to lead. There's no God concept within science. God is a cultural construction.
God is defined as the creator. If you define God as creator and you have a big
scientifically, open a physics book. No, it's not. There's no God in any physics book.
But then you're begging the question. Then you're begging the question because
I'm not begging the question.
God preceded
I'm trying.
science.
No.
How
Hold
could
on.
God?
Hold on.
Here's
Let's hold on.
Mitch,
wait.
I want to finish this thought though. Here's what I'm missing. Okay. Here's what you're missing. Science is based on empiricism. If you just look at the world and study the world and the way it works, honestly and fairly, based on evidence, without any kind of superstitious mumbo jumbo, this God concept doesn't come about. It just doesn't.
That's because it preceded science.
I wish you would stop. Does it matter? Does it matter?
No. You're saying.
First of all,
you're saying that God is not a scientific concept. God preceded science by millennia. How could it be a scientific concept since science hadn't been invented yet? First of all, that's just
wrong. God didn't precede science. It's just wrong. But anyway.
The concept of science did.
I think what he's talking about is theology preceded science. Yes,
exactly.
that is true.
Yeah.
So
but it doesn't mean that any of it's true, though, because theology doesn't make testable claims.
But you can't have expected them thousands of years ago, before there was any science, to apply scientific principles to what they were doing the same way we do. But that doesn't mean that we can't go back and either refute or defend what they were saying scientifically.
I agree with George on
agree.
that. We can
Okay.
refute things scientifically, and I think the point about science is it's based on evidence, and when we lack evidence, for example, the evidence of a God, then science doesn't project that God exists. It says, I don't know until we get the evidence that this God exists. I we don't have sufficient evidence to make that claim.
All right, God is defined as the creator, right? Would you not say that the Big Bang is evidence that this known universe of ours has been created?
No.
No,
Yes, no.
creation is a totally different thing. When we say create, we mean like for a person to create, they would take some Play-Doh, for example, mold it into something, and they've gone through a creative process, an intelligent process that made a sculpture, for example. That's what creation is meant when people say God created the universe. There's no such thing, or we don't have evidence of such a thing.
We have the four fundamental laws of nature. We have the chemical laws. We have this whole universe with its structure and all that. How could you not say that that's not creation? I mean, that's a much
There's
more vastly complex creation than what
it's
anything
just
we've
a
ever done.
causal structure. It's like saying that a mountain was created. We understand that all the forces created a mountain. We never say that the mountain was actually created by
I would
something.
say it was. Of course, it was. It was created by the process of evolution, by whatever created the process of evolution.
Okay, but that's not what's meant when people say God created the universe.
Yes, what's meant by God created the universe is God caused the universe to come into being. When
It
we
means that
human beings,
God thought about, had plans, and said, "This is what I'm going to do," and then did it. That's what
yes, exactly.
that's
When that's
not what that's what we're saying. We have no evidence of. We have no evidence of this intelligence in the other than us.
well,
George,
here's the thing.
your views, George, seem to be now like traditional theism. Actually, it even seems to me like it's down the line of Calvinism because you accept a deterministic universe. God created the universe, and every single thing in it is completely determined by God's will. That's no different from Calvinism.
Well, Chandler and I did a whole episode on this. You're right. I went from being a pantheist to being a theist, but an atheist. And for example, I would reject Calvinism because these crazy people believe that God is completely just, will make people do things that are evil, and then condemn them to hell. So
All
I
right, so
think
you agree that God is evil.
God is both good and evil. Unless we can absolve God of evil, but then if we do that, we'd also have to not claim
So
that he's good.
would you say that God is amoral, just totally non-moral?
There's one way that we could say that, but in another sense, I think we'd have to acknowledge that God is both good and evil.
All right, how would you answer this question, George? Who created God?
God, I mean, as far as I know, that's the question that we have to assume, as with the universe, that reality must always have existed. So God, as the creator of this observable universe that's only 13.7 billion years old, must always have existed.
But why couldn't
So
you just stop at the universe and say the universe has always existed?
because our known universe had a beginning 13.7 billion years ago.
There could be a past before it. It could have
That,
come from another universe.
exactly. So whatever is before is what we're defining as God, what created our current universe.
So as far as we know, we don't know what that was. It could have been a ham sandwich. Who knows what created the universe? But we would only really call that God if it had intelligent intent to create the universe. If it didn't have intelligent intent, then we would just say it's just part of the process. So it's part of the natural process, and that's it. We wouldn't ever label it God.
Well, that's why when we refer to our acts as being intelligent, and then we remind ourselves that, wait a minute, we're just puppets. We're not we're not the puppeteer. Then we have to say, well, we're just manifesting this intelligence that, if we're going to properly ascribe it, has to be ascribed to whatever is making us do what we do.
Okay, and then there's the big problem, because this is what me, Mitch, and I think Michael are saying, that there's no evidence for that intelligence. We understand how we evolved. We understand that the process is not an intelligent process. It's just basically a causal process that leads to mutations, which leads to whether you're going to survive in that environment or not survive. And if the ones that survive in the environment propagate to the next generation, which might mutate. So there's no intelligent process there.
I mean,
Exactly.
the
Under the naturalistic view, the laws of physics are dysteleological, meaning they're not teleological. There's no end goal, there's no will, there's no intentionality in it. It's just the laws of physics evolving according to the rules, and whatever happens, happens. There's no end goal in mind.
But all right, that viewpoint is basically contradicted by human intention and human purpose. In other words, like if what we do is not up to us and we're doing purposeful activity, we can't assign that purpose to us. So it has to be assigned to whatever, is making us do it.
We can assign intention to us. There's no reason we can't assign intention. It's just that we're causally influenced. Our
But
intentions are causally
it's not our
influenced.
intention. In other words, like we're puppets. This intention is being imposed upon us.
Yes, by the
Yes, but
teleological laws of physics.
Right.
But what I'm saying is like, when we consider human behavior, we kind of like, we see the purpose and intention to it, right? Well, I mean, like if we see purpose and intention to what we do, how could we not see purpose and intention to a universe that's vastly more designed, complex, and intelligent than anything we've ever done?
Because we understand causality. We understand that things happen through processes of motion, of gravity, of all these different forces that don't need intention. They're just mechanical processes. It's like a clock. A clock doesn't need intention to tell the time. It just mechanically processes the time. Yes, we created the clock, but there's nothing that necessarily needs to have created us because we understand how evolution works, how simple things can turn complex.
Yeah, but if Mitch, I mean, Trick, if you're taking a reductionist viewpoint, then you could just apply that to human beings and say, well, there's no real intentionality or purpose. We're just like these atoms, just basically interacting with each other.
Well, that position is called eliminative materialism, and it's not a view that I hold. I think that consciousness is reduced to things going on in the brain, which themselves are not conscious, but consciousness emerges when you've got a fully functioning brain, in the same way that flight emerges from an airplane, even though the individual parts of an airplane themselves can't fly.
Right.
All right, but how are we?
Because I think what you're doing, George, is you're making what is known as the fallacy of division. It's a logical fallacy. And using the example of the airplane, we know airplanes can fly, but the individual parts of an airplane can't fly. The wings by themselves can't fly. The engine by itself can't fly. The tail by itself can't fly. The cockpit by itself can't fly. But when the whole thing is together, you get flight. Flight is something that emerges when the whole thing is together. What we're saying is that consciousness and intentionality is something that emerges from brains when you have the whole thing working together, even though the individual atoms inside a brain are not themselves conscious.
I realize that, but I think that's a parochial view. I think that's a view that's kind of like anthropocentric in the sense that like we kind of like want to attribute consciousness to ourselves as human beings, but we want to deny it like single cells that are aware of their environment. They replicate. They do a lot of the same things we do, but they do it through a different mechanism. So in other words, like we're basing our idea of what consciousness is based on this kind of like biology that we human beings have, without recognizing that this consciousness could arise, and it seems to arise through different mechanisms.
But why must it be that every single thing down to the quark level must be conscious? Why can't it be that consciousness is something that emerges when you have complex interacting systems of atoms?
Michael, how are you defining consciousness?
Self-awareness.
Self-awareness?
Yeah.
Why can't it just be awareness? Why does it have to include the self?
Well, there's different degrees of consciousness.
Yeah.
It could be self-awareness, like, the human level consciousness, but maybe there are certain animals that are conscious, but they're not aware of themselves in the same exact way that we are, that we're going to die and that we're individual beings, but they're aware of their environment.
And it's not just awareness, it's the ability to experience. For example, I can experience the color red. When I'm in a comatose state, when they put me under because I'm going for surgery, I can no longer experience. As a matter of fact, as soon as I wake up, hours later, it feels like no time has gone by because they put me in an unconscious state. If I was still conscious, I'd feel all the things that they've done while doing the surgery, but I don't feel any of that because they they know the mechanism of the brain, and they know how to turn off my conscious experience. That's what we're talking about when we say consciousness.
All right, so like we can expand this. In other words, like, so consciousness is awareness, but I think we'd have to conclude and agree that in order for something to be intelligent, something has to first be conscious. I don't think we can have intelligence without consciousness. So then, like, if we apply this reasoning to the creation of our human brain, a structure, an organ vastly more complex than anything we human beings have ever done, how could we not say that whatever created the human brain, even if it took billions of years to create or hundreds of millions of years, how can we say that that being or entity was not conscious of its intent to create the brain?
Because we understand the causal process of it. We understand that it's the process of it is no different than a ball rolling down a hill,
But
which we
that's
don't.
you can apply that exact same reasoning to anything human beings do and say, well, we're not conscious because look, we can apply the law of physics and quantum theory to our behavior.
The difference would be is that we have brains and we have a nervous system, and we can see that there are electrical signals going from the skin cells to the brain, and so there's something going on there, and that's exactly how we recognize other animals as being conscious as well.
So in other words, you're saying that you're relying on knowledge of a mechanism for determining whether something is conscious or intelligent or not. But see, like if you apply that principle of requiring a mechanism, and you can't accept the reality of something unless you see a mechanism, apply that to the entirety of the universe, you'd have to conclude that the universe doesn't exist because we have no idea of what kind of mechanism created it. And you can, not just to the universe, any kind of scientific photosynthesis, cell division. Hold on, Michael. Any kind of scientific knowledge we have, whether it's photosynthesis, cell division, any process, we can kind of like bring it down to more and more fundamental aspects of it. And eventually, with everything we know in science, we're going to get to a point where we have to admit, well, we don't know what's causing, the fundamental aspects of anything.
We don't know is fine. It's just that when we say yes, we do know, that's when we have the problem. When we say, yes, it was some intelligent thing that created the universe, then we have a problem because we don't have evidence of that.
Trick, my point is like your criteria for determining whether something exists or not, for example, like intelligence, is that there has to be a mechanism that we're aware of that explains it. But if you apply that principle to everything we know in science, then we'd have to conclude that nothing exists because fundamentally...
George, we would have to conclude that the universe is not conscious, not that it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
No,
if we see a particular kind of a complex mechanism going on that only conscious beings or things that exhibit what we would expect like conscious behavior have, and we don't see that in the universe, then we conclude that the universe is not conscious, not that it doesn't exist.
It's the same thing with it's the same thing with
you're again, like Michael, apply that principle. Basically, like we're attributing consciousness to human beings because we understand the mechanism, the biological mechanism that creates consciousness, but we're not going to apply it to other things where we're not aware of the mechanism that would create the consciousness. Apply that to the existence of the universe. By that reasoning, you'd have to say, well, we are not aware of what created the Big Bang, so that therefore we have to conclude that the Big Bang doesn't exist. In other words, like having as a premise that we understand the mechanism is no rationale for determining whether something exists or not.
No, George, I think your logic goes way off the table. By observing in the universe that there's nothing like a brain or a nervous system or anything that we understand is required for consciousness, we would conclude that the universe is not conscious. We wouldn't conclude that the universe doesn't exist. Why would we conclude that it doesn't exist? That makes no sense.
Because you're applying the existence of consciousness to this criteria that we have to understand how it came about biologically.
We don't know how it came about. We just apply it because we understand that we are conscious and we understand common biology. We understand the behavior of conscious things. So we look at this behavior and we through behavioral science, through neuroscience, and through our understandings of consciousness itself, that our own experiences,
Allow
we
me
can
to
infer consciousness exists
allow me to
for
interject for a moment. So yeah, about this consciousness thing. Okay, this is really, we're back to semantics again. Okay, at some point a word has to have a meaning, and at some point you have to exhaust the definition of that word. You can't extend the definition of a word as much as you want. Words are created in order to communicate very explicit ideas. And the word consciousness originated from this idea, this notion of living things, in particular humans, but now possibly animals, and a certain degree of awareness and interactivity that they have, a certain way that sufficiently complex organisms can perceive the world. If you want to extend this word to other things, by all means, you can. But anytime you do that, you start to lose sight of the word. For example, you could have one word that describes both a car and a plane. You could say this word means car. Cars and planes both fall under this category. And now you've lost the convenience of having a word that accurately just communicates the idea of what a car is. That is, it doesn't fly. That is, it's on the road. That is, it's the kind of vehicle that most people take every day. So I think you're putting way too much power, George, into what words are and extending them for your own motives, your own sort of motivations. You know what I
No,
mean?
I would
I don't
claim
really
the
understand.
exact opposite. I would claim that what you guys are expressing is anthropocentrism. In other words, we've done this with the entire
But
universe.
how
That
can you
we're the
disagree with
center.
what I just said, though? Where's the
The
disagreement?
way I would agree is, Mitch, is that like basically let's limit it to intelligence rather than consciousness, because I think intelligence is a bit more defined as a concept than consciousness. Consciousness has, in psychology, there's about 20 different definitions. So with intelligence, we determine whether something is intelligent or not based on its manifestation. It has to be logical. It has to make sense. It has to, have certain characteristics that we observe, and then we will define something as intelligent. Okay, so now if you apply that principle of how we define intelligence, then yes, we've discovered, oh my God, this intelligence is not limited to human beings. It's also found in other animals. It's
We
even also
create, but
found in
George, what you're
cells.
missing is we create the definitions. We
I know, but
create
we also
we
change them.
That doesn't make any sense. We can, yes, that's what I'm saying. You can create a definition, manipulate a definition to achieve any goal. That's not what we're talking about. We're trying to map what reality
Yeah,
really
but you have to be
is.
consistent. In other words, like if you're going to
I don't know
define
what you
intelligence by the manifestation, then you can't exclude other life forms from having the same manifestation. And you can't, in other words, like it would be an arbitrary definition instead of an accurate, logical definition.
I think you're missing the bigger point. That's not the point I'm trying to make. I think you're missing the larger point. My point is we create definitions to try to describe certain phenomena that exist or to try to communicate certain ideas. If you expand the idea and you expand the definition,
There you go.
you lose something. You broaden it.
Good,
Just
good
like the
talking, Nick.
example I gave with the car and the plane. So you can do that, but you have to understand what you are doing. You are not.
I don't know how to
You
mute
are
it.
not. Hello? Is there some
Hey, listen, I
interference?
gotta go.
All
It was
right,
nice
Nick.
talking to you. George, I'll see you Wednesday night. Mitch, I'll see you Wednesday night. All right.
Sounds good,
Take it
dude.
easy, Nick.
All right.
All right.
All right.
Okay, but you understand, we're not like discovering something here. We're just creating something. You're just manipulating definitions and words
I'm
until
not
you're
Mitch.
satisfied.
You
You just
got to
said
understand.
yourself there's 50 different definitions for the word
They're not mine. They're not
intelligence.
mine. These exist in psychology. What I'm saying is
I
there's
don't
no
know. They
consensus
don't
on.
no. It's not about existing in psychology. It's about people making things up in order to describe what they think exists or in order to communicate, sorry, in order to describe the world, the reality that we have, or to communicate ideas. It's
Right, exactly. So what I'm saying is like if there's 20 different definitions of consciousness, who's to say one's right over another? I think the way we say it's right is one makes more sense. So with definition of intelligence, you might have an intelligence that
someone help
limits
me here.
you
Someone
might have
jump in.
a definition of intelligence that limits it to human beings, but I think if you want to be consistent in your logic, you'd have to apply that
I think
intelligence to other.
there's a circularity to your logic that you are not seeing right now. I don't.
George, let me,
I
because
don't.
I just understand your views now as being changed. I used to you were a pantheist, and now you're a kind of theist. You think God is separate from the universe, right?
Well, actually, pantheism is found in Judaism, in Christianity, in Hinduism. Pantheism is actually preceded monotheism. So,
Well,
like, so I could
agree,
be.
I agree with you that it preceded it, but once you get Judaism, you pretty much either have henotheism or you have monotheism.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with henotheism, but
Henotheism is the view where there's like one really awesome god who's like the god, and then there's sub gods below it.
all right, I could see that, and the sub-gods would be what we would describe as the laws of nature, the electromagnetic force, the
No, no,
chemical
no.
laws.
They would be beings that have a will, that are alive, that are agents. They would be
No,
agents with a
well,
conscience.
I mean, what I'm referring to scientifically they are agents, quote unquote agents, but they're not. We don't have to endow them with human attributes. They
Okay,
do what they do.
okay. So the question I was trying to get at is, given that everybody here rejects free will, how do you reconcile the existence of God with non-free will? Because God would have to not have free will either.
Well, the interesting thing about God is like
So
if
God would be determined by what? You're just there's a step back. If God
no,
is,
no, you're
is
right. In other
you
words,
know,
like, all right, if we're trying to answer, if God, at the beginning of this, illogical, because in other words, like when we're when we're trying to ascribe free will to God, we have to go back to the beginning of this causal chain, and logic prohibits us from doing that because we have to like kind of like consider, wait a minute, you know, it seems like reality or God is eternal, so how could there have been an initial decision? But now, if we define God as being omniscient, or in other words, like if we suppose that in order to be everything and rule everything, then a being has to know everything, then we can conclude that at this present moment, God has no more free will than any human being or anything else, because God's constrained by his foreknowledge of what God would be doing.
and was God's decision to create the universe also predetermined?
Well, again, that's where we reach an impasse, because this concept of eternal, the infinite eternal regress prohibits us from ever coming to a point where we can say God at this point made any kind of decision.
It would seem to me that God would have to be determined if determinism or non-free will is the overarching theme that permeates through all of existence. There would never
Absolutely.
have been a time where God was had a free will and then got locked into it. It would have to be that God, whatever it is under your view of the word God, would also have to be determined and have no free will, but you're using God to explain our determinism. So it seems to me that you got a chicken and egg kind of problem right there. You're using God to explain our determinism and our intelligence given no free will, but God would also have to be just as determined as we are. And so God would have to have a God of his own that determined him, and you're going to have an infinite regress of that, right?
Right, and we could apply that same reasoning not just to God, but we could apply it secularly to naturalism. In other words, like we can't say there was a fundamental cause of anything because of this infinite regress.
The question is, we can you're asking the question, if it's not up to us, who is it up to? But we can also ask the question, if it's not up to God, then who's it up to? So
Exactly.
you have an infinite regress of that same problem that you're posing on
Yeah.
humans.
George
That
is just taking it one step back, but it's leaving the door. The door is still open. He's just taking it one step back.
Hey guys, I just want you to know I'm in agreement with the infinite regress thing here because, we do have the problem of, like you mentioned, well, whatever it's up to, well, it can't be up to that because that's just as determined as anything else. And so I don't find it meaningful to call something God because the idea of God seems to have the idea of an agent that can genuinely make a free choice. So yeah, I don't think it's that meaningful, and I think it is confusing.
But you got to understand the logic of this. In other words, like again, we do actions, we have behavior, we have a multitude of actions that we do, a multitude of thoughts, feelings, and all, and we're not fundamentally causing them. So I mean, we can conclude that they're not being fundamentally caused by anything, in which case we have a world that's happening that's really not fundamentally caused by anything. It's just happening. But our mind, our science, our reasoning tends to want to attribute kind of agency not just to us, but to, for example, like what causes gravity, what caused the Big Bang, what caused the unification theory in physics, what is controlling or causing the four fundamental forces to act the way they do.
Or what
Science.
causes God? You can ask the same question for the God that you're proposing as the answer to all these. You can say, you can say God is the answer to all these questions, but then we can ask the exact same question for God. We can say, well, what causes God?
I know, Trick, and what I'm acknowledging, what I think we all have to acknowledge is whether we see causality naturalistically or theistically relative to God, we reach the same impasse that you can't attribute fundamental causality either to God or the universe because of this infinite regress. And so we're left concluding that the answer to that transcends logic.
Hold on a second. I don't think it transcends logic. Basically, if you're an atheist, you come to a brute fact. The brute fact is just existence. The universe exists. It may have a cause, but if there's another universe before it, the totality of universes, whether it's infinite or finite, its existence is a brute fact. It's a fact that has no explanation. That's what you eventually come to if you're an atheist. And the laws of physics are simply just descriptions of the way the universe operates, from moment to moment. But we explain intelligence really through the laws of physics mixed with evolution, biological evolution. It evolves over time. But I'm not sure that you can say that it transcends logic, because that would be something to me something that transcends logic would be illogical.
Right. What I'm saying is transcends logic. In other words, like we posit that reality, whether we call it God or the universe, is eternal, right? Then if we posit that and conclude that, we can never reach a point at which anything started. And to my mind, I mean, I think I accept that more so than to accept that everything had a beginning. But still, this infinite regress, think about it, dude. I mean, it's like, imagine a Google and then multiply it times a Google times a Google times a Google and apply each of these ones to a billion or a trillion years or Google years. You're going back, like, I mean, can you understand how, like, the concept of something just like being causally evolving, but never having had a beginning? Because can you understand how, like, our mind can't like really conceive of that, like, because we're always asking, well, wait a minute, like, how could it have like not had some kind of like beginning?
Well, it depends. Your view on time becomes relevant here. And as you guys know, I mean, I take the B theory on time. I'm an eternalist. I think every single moment in time exists ontologically, past, present, and future. And what we call now the present is purely subjective. It's just like what we call here on the earth. It's just where you happen to be in space time. And to me, that view resolves the idea of an infinite regress. It takes the problems away from it because there is no moment called now that is objective, that has to move from one moment to the next. Because you could argue that if the universe has an infinite past and there's a single objective moment called now that's moving 1 second at a time into the future, how could we ever have gotten to the present? Because it would have had to transcend an infinite number of moments to get to this present moment. And you would never get to it because an infinite amount of time would have to have passed, and you can't reach an infinite amount of time. But eternalism solves that whole thing because every single moment is now. So every single moment in the universe is just a subjective viewpoint. So that maybe would be a good topic to talk about in a future podcast.
All right, but no, it's relevant. We can talk about it now. But here's the thing, Michael. Basically, with your conclusion of like eternalism is based on relativity, right?
Yep.
All right, but here's the problem. Relativity is a theory that's designed to explain behaviors of objects relative to each other. In other words, like, yes, relatively, we can't determine whether, event A happened after or before event B because of this relativity. But then, like, there's an objectivity that tells us the universe is 13.77 billion years old, which is at a level more fundamental than the theory of relativity.
No, it's perfectly compatible with relativity. The thing about the Big Bang is that all of space and time was in one moment. And if you have all of space in one moment, you can't have relativity because everything's at one point. Relativity takes effect when you have a universe where there's different space in between different objects, and then you can
Well,
say that the passage of time is relative to your position in space relative to other things. But if everything's in one point, then relativity doesn't relativistic effects of the universe don't take effect.
I understand your reasoning. What I'm saying, Michael, is that basically, like, your eternalism requires two perspectives, two relative perspectives. Whereas, like, if you take the universe as one entity, not relative to anything, just objectively, then we can conclude that it began 13.8 billion years ago. And so,
You,
in other words, like, so there was a past and there will be a future.
yes, but you can't say that it began as if it began to exist from nothing. It always existed every single moment in the universe. You can only say that it began in the same way you can say that the first second on a DVD begins the movie. But the whole rest of the movie already exists.
Here's the deal. I think what George is trying to do is by opening up the discussion, realizing humans don't have a free will, then a lot of people will naturally ask that question. Well, then what is it up to? It's not up to me. And I think what will happen is we'll follow the causal chain and end up at an infinite regression that means that any gods that anyone can postulate also don't have free will. So it's not fundamentally up to anything, which is exactly what Mitch said.
I think George is unwilling to say that God does not exist, and therefore he has these conflicts. You have a huge conflict, and I agree. It's difficult to, as we've discussed many times in the past, it's very difficult to reject this notion of free will and still maintain religious beliefs. And I think the difference of opinion, to put it lightly, that we're having today it's really emblematic of that problem. When you try to maintain religious belief after rejecting free will, it causes, maybe not, it's not necessarily a negative thing, but it causes one to go into really deep explorations into what God is. What is the nature of God, if it exists whatsoever?
Well,
And
that's what we're doing. We've been doing that for the last 3, 4 podcasts.
yeah, I'm describing what we've been doing, but I'm saying I think the main issue, the biggest point of contention, is the fact that you were unwilling. I don't know if you're unwilling, George, or not. Maybe I shouldn't put words in your mouth, but you seem unwilling to explore the notion of no agency and no God. Like,
Okay,
just
again,
play devil's advocate for a second.
Mitch. All right, so think about it.
Yeah, okay, I know your point, but let's look at our point. How about this? How about 14.3 billion years ago? We don't know what happened, but there was a singularity, a point of near infinite density. Matter and energy coalesced into this really, really tiny, 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 tiny dot. And then, for some reason, it explodes out. It explodes out into the near vacuum of space, because there's no such thing as a real vacuum, but the near vacuum. And
Actually,
matter,
there's no space before that.
exactly, okay,
Technically, there's
yeah,
not even
yeah,
space.
very,
Right.
very well. And then in certain pockets, eventually, we have aggregations of matter. We have the interstellar nebula, where huge clumps of matter are formed. From there, stars are born. Stars are reactors that start doing things. Mike described it once as a ball rolling down a hill. So 14.3 billion years ago, the ball started rolling down the hill. We don't know.
Oh, 13.8.
13.8. Whatever the latest, I don't know what the latest estimation is.
13.79 plus or minus 100 million years.
I'm sorry, sir. I stand corrected. Thank
All
you
right.
very much. My mistake. At what point in this conversation does God come in? All of a sudden, so at that point, all the physical laws originate there at the Big Bang. And then all these laws are just followed, just cause and effect, just the ball rolling down the hill, just dominoes toppling, which eventually leads to existence the way it is now. Just examine that possibility. Just let's not use the God hypothesis for now. Let's not presuppose there's anything called God. Let's not say it's meaningful. We can explain everything that happens starting from the Big Bang, not before, starting from the Big Bang. Science is enough. Logic is enough. Math is enough. When we don't know, we say we don't know. Now all of a sudden say, let's call this God. Changes nothing. All it does is raise more questions. It doesn't help the understanding. And this is the point. This is the problem. This is the part of your arguments, George. Well, Nick left, but Nick as well earlier. Where, I just don't see where you're going. It seems like you have the strong desire for the world to be something,
Okay,
but that just
Mitch,
seems to be wishful thinking.
Mitch, before there's scientific consensus, understanding, there's hypothesis. And hypothesis is generally conceptual. For example, James Lovelock hypothesized in the 60s that the Earth is a self-regulating, quote-unquote, organism. He was laughed at a lot, back in the 60s, right? Because, like, the science didn't understand it yet. Today, that's the accepted understanding.
Yeah, okay,
that's
but George, that's the point. The point is, I want you to take a second and just imagine that perspective on reality. Just stop for a second. Stop with the God thing. For 1 second, just pretend there's no God. Just think about that. Think about the universe starting that way and things just happening. And instead of worrying about agency, let's do what we usually do when we're talking about determine whether the universe is deterministic or indeterministic. That is, does the universe permit acausality sometimes, perhaps quantum phenomena? Okay? Just think about that. Isn't that sufficient? Isn't that sufficient to explain everything without invoking God? Isn't that enough?
Or scientifically, yes. If you want to kind of like,
Yeah,
describe
scientifically.
everything.
All I'm talking about is science.
Absolutely. It
That's
is
enough.
sufficient. But you have to understand that
It's sufficient.
science serves humanity, not the other way around.
That's,
In other words,
I'm not worried about the service of humanity. I'm concerned about the truth. Let's assume this is the truth. I don't care about servicing the psychological,
all right, but the truth,
emotional needs
Mitch, the truth. The
I'm
truth is
what
like,
I'm concerned
Mitch,
about.
the truth is before there was any science,
Okay, but I
those
know you said
people.
that before, but I'm saying let's stick to this model. Let's use this model. Just stay there for a second. Let's stay in that place. We have this model. You can see it's sufficient. You can see that you're concerned with the needs of people. I said, okay, forget the needs.
All right,
of
let me turn that.
Let's focus on
around. Let me turn out your reasoning around. So, like, we can conceive of the universe as God, right? But then apply our scientific principles and reasoning and method to this conception of God and the universe and everything, and arrive at the same conclusions. So why move from the conception of God to the conception of the universe?
Again, well, I mean, this is obvious, right? I mean, the burden of proof is on the person who claims that there is this other thing that exists.
But that's what I'm saying.
So,
you keep on, in other words, like the burden of proof has already been met. There is a creation. There is the laws of nature that govern everything. Everything is eternal. Everything is omnipresent or everywhere. These are the definitions of God. That's why you can't refute God's existence logically or scientifically.
Whoa, George, you're starting to sound like a lot of creationists I run into from time to time. Your definition of God seems to be kind of moving around. You're essentially believing in a traditional theistic God now. Is that correct? Like an all-knowing, all-powerful, omnipresent God. Is that correct?
That's what we've been debating over the last 3-4 podcasts. Yes, if you
And
take
your God is non-physical. Is that correct, or is it physical?
both. In other words, like the non-physical aspect would be the known universe.
Is it temporal? Does it exist in time or outside of time?
Both.
Did it have a beginning? Did it begin to exist at some point?
My understanding and the understanding of the definition is that God is eternal.
And it's completely determined by what?
By God. That's the only thing.
How could God determine himself? We're saying there's no free will anywhere in the universe. God is determined. What determines God?
All right. If you define God as everything and eternal, then in a certain sense, you have to conclude that God is determining God. In another sense, you could say, well, actually, nothing is determining anything because of this causal regress, and that's why I say that the notion of infinite regress, while we have to accept it, again, we can't wrap our minds around it because it defies logic.
I don't think we necessarily have to accept an infinite regress. But it seems to me that your God is some characteristics of the traditional theistic God, but it's also somewhat pantheistic. It's kind of like a mixture of the two. But I think your concept of God is a little bit fuzzy, and it needs to be outlined.
Well, that's why, Michael. That's why when we did the several podcasts, over the last few days, I was referring to the dictionary and the wiki definitions of God. So in other words, like, it's not my definition that God is a creator. That's what you find in every dictionary and in the wiki. It's not my definition that God is all powerful. You know, that's the traditional
But
theistic
definitions are just
definition.
words people make up. This is like it doesn't mean any. That doesn't mean anything. Just
But
because you've satisfied a definition doesn't mean you've proven anything.
if you
It's because
define
you've
a table
accomplished.
as a something with some legs that you put stuff on, right? And you want to try to dispute or refute that or disprove that, yes, you have to start with an agreed upon definition.
Even if we agree to those definitions, there's no reason to think that the universe was created.
Yeah,
Well, again,
George,
that's
can your view be compatible with an eternal universe?
absolutely. And but Mitch,
How would
Trick,
God create an eternal universe?
that's where I'm saying it transcends logic. We can't conceive of, like, you know, eternity. In other words, like, an eternal universe technically isn't quote unquote created, but that's why we're saying, that's
But
what I'm saying, that we have, no, Mitch, Michael, let me finish this. Basically, there are different senses to which we apply these words, these terms we're using. In other words, like, if we're talking about the observable universe, which is the only thing we have any empirical knowledge of, then we have to admit that it was created. If we're talking conceptually, logically, then we can expand that beyond science and conclude that everything is eternal and that it couldn't have had a beginning or couldn't have been created. So it depends on how we're using the word creation and eternity.
whoa,
Yeah.
I'm not sure I totally follow that, George.
We don't have to say it's created. We don't have to say it's created any more than we have to say that
The humans were
above.
created.
What's that?
I said we don't have to say it's any more created than humans were created.
Yeah, humans
Yeah.
created. That's fine. But he would say humans are created, right?
I would
Yeah.
guess, aren't humans created? I guess, yeah.
What are they
I mean,
created from?
here's the thing, and again, this is a matter of sense, and we use this like with free will, like, we're responsible, we're not fundamentally responsible. We were created, you know, from atoms, but we weren't fundamentally created from atoms because there was something that created atoms.
Okay, then there's no reason to think there was a fundamental creation in the universe.
Yeah, unless you're applying creation to the observable universe. In other words,
No, the observable universe could have always existed, even when it was a singularity. That singularity could have always existed.
I know, but what I'm saying is that, like, that's just a guess. We have no evidence for that. We have
I'm just
no
saying
evidence of.
it doesn't matter. It could have always existed, so we don't have evidence for a creator in the sense that you're talking about. There's no
What?
evidence that there was a creation of the universe in the sense that you're talking about.
Okay, wait a minute. If we're considering the observable universe that we, you know, consider to be 13.79 whatever billion years old, then yes, we ascribe the Big Bang as the event that quote unquote created the universe, and we have no knowledge of what came before that.
No, if we're saying the singularity always existed, then the universe wasn't created any more than we were created from atoms.
That's
And
what I'm saying.
It's
Trick, I'm
only
saying
it's only in that sense. It's not any fundamental creation. It's
you
just
got.
in the sense of causality. It's like saying your parents are the creator of you. That doesn't mean your parents are God, though we can propose that your parents are the creator of you.
Well, that's what, again,
I
like
think we're agreed on
with
that,
free
aren't we?
will, with free will, we do things, right? But we never fundamentally do. We cause things. We never fundamentally do things. So, like, if you're saying yes, that the universe has not been created because there's something before that, I can accept that. I understand that. But if we're being empirical, if we're being scientific, you know, anything that we posit as having, you know, existed before the Big Bang, we're using logic. We're not using empiricism or science. So again,
Well, we are using science, but we're using theoretical physics. We don't have empirical evidence of anything existing before the Big Bang, but we do have theoretical models of the universe in which there are times before the Big Bang.
right, but that's all, you know. In other words, that's that's based on logic, and logic is the foundation of science, of course. So it's not like I'm denying that or discrediting it. But I'm saying is like our knowledge of the observable universe is based on empirical evidence, evidence that we can deduce from the background radiation and redshift and all that stuff. Whereas like anything we deduce, happened before the Big Bang, it's theoretical, but it's conceptually theoretical rather than based on empirical evidence.
In your view, George, did God have a choice in creating the universe?
Did God have a choice? Well, I mean, so like if we posit that God was eternal or the universe is eternal, we never get to a point where God chose anything. That's why I said it transcends like, our understanding of causality.
So wouldn't it be the case that in your view that God and the universe simply just eternally coexist like two conjoined twins?
Well, I mean, again, most technically, God and the universe are synonymous. If we're defining God as everything, well, the universe is everything.
But you now believe in a God that exists outside of the universe that created it, right?
Well, that's only if we refer to the observable universe. If we want to expand to like whatever created the Big Bang, and we have to kind of like posit that something did.
So if a singularity always existed, if it was an eternal singularity, you would say that singularity is what God is, correct? Since that
yes,
is that's what created the universe per
actually,
your
no,
definition.
But I don't think I could stop at the singularity. I think that there must have been something before the singularity that may not have had any of the characteristics of the singularity.
I'm saying it's an eternal singularity.
It's possible. It's possible. We can only guess.
But would you call that singularity God then?
Absolutely. If that's what we concluded, the singularity to be eternally, yes, absolutely.
George, what do you think about Santa Claus?
Santa Claus has no empirical logical evidence. Why do you ask?
So, for example, human
Santa Claus.
beings invented Santa Claus. And you could say some people believe in Santa Claus. It's theistic. And you might try to say, well, all these people who are agnostic or atheistic towards the idea of Santa Claus, they have the wrong idea. They really need to be acutheists.
No, because
Santa Claus. Well, let me finish. Let me finish this ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. I'm sorry.
So they see all these properties. People have these dictionary definition. In the dictionary, there's a definition of Santa Claus, and there's several different dictionaries, and all these dictionaries have different definitions of Santa Claus. And their claims, scientific claims about what Santa Claus can do, but some people have more nuanced claims about Santa Claus. And there actually is evidence. And if we look at the world around us, we can see these properties in the world and say, that's what Santa Claus is. There's rain that drops on rooftops. Santa Claus is said to visit every rooftop.
But that's not how Santa Claus is defined. Santa Claus is a big fat guy who gives kids presents. I'm sorry.
So Santa Claus exists in the malls. He exists. There's no denying that Santa Claus doesn't exist.
I mean,
that Santa Claus exists. I mean.
If you're saying that Santa Claus is a concept in the imagination of some people, fine. Imagination exists.
No.
I'm saying
the Santa Claus in the mall exists.
No, that is an impersonation. That's not really Santa Claus.
Wait, hold on. It's a guy with a white beard wearing a red outfit. Why isn't that not Santa Claus?
Because Santa Claus is my understanding. Santa Claus goes over the world, drives these reindeers.
No, you don't have an accurate understanding,
George. Yeah. We have to change these. There's the primary properties of Santa Claus, and then there's these things that people made up.
Exactly.
Well, show me a wiki page. Show me a wiki page that defines Santa Claus as the guy you see in the mall.
It's on Wikipedia.
It even says sit on Santa's lap right in the mall. I mean, how could it not be Santa Claus?
Come on, guys. I mean, basically, what you're trying to say is like we can define anything in certain ways, and I'm not using my definition. I'm using the historical definitions of God that are not mine. They're included in wiki and dictionary.
I'm not using mine either. I'm using my cousin's. This is my cousin's definition. My cousin is 65 years old. This is his definition.
It can be easily refuted.
No, but you're cherry picking properties, George.
Does it not rain? It rains all around the world, and rain can visit depending on the intensity of the storm clouds, an entire geographic region. You could say that it rains all over the world except in certain particular
All right,
places.
so here's the thing. Here's Mitch. So like, all right, so like, if your cousin or whatever is defining Santa Claus in that way, then yes, we cannot refute his definition. I mean, so like, so
Right.
apply that to like, so the way historically God has been defined, we can't refute that definition.
Well, per Wikipedia, Santa Claus is generally depicted as a portly, joyous, white-bearded man, sometimes with spectacles, wearing a red coat and white collars and cuffs, white cuff, red trousers. So basically, these are properties of Santa Claus. So we can say those are the correct properties because there's people that exist, but the other ones that say that Santa Claus actually flies to chimneys, that's we can avoid those because they're not reality. But there are properties that we can attribute to Santa Claus. Therefore, we'll tell people that Santa Claus exists. The problem is when people hear the word Santa Claus, they don't think of just the fictional character. They think, he's talking about this guy that doesn't exist because they actually know that there's no guy that actually flies to chimneys.
Exactly. So you refute one and you accept the other.
Yeah, but we don't say that Santa Claus exists. No one says that Santa Claus exists except for
so
young
why
children.
are we debating this?
because you're saying God exists, and we're saying, well, that's kind of like saying Santa Claus exists.
But no, you just said nobody's saying that Santa Claus exists.
I'm saying Santa Claus exists.
A lot of people are saying God exists.
I'm saying Santa Claus exists.
Yeah, I know, and they're
imagine
using the
people-
other semantic. They're using the semantic of God as we would use the semantic of Santa Claus that flies to chimneys.
But yes, right. So flying through chimneys, you refute. A God who's benevolent, I refute. A God who's everywhere, I can't refute.
But if I tell people Santa exists, it just confuses the matter.
Until you explain it. It's like when we try to explain to people that they don't have a free will, they're confused beyond their minds. So like, yes, they may be confused now, but maybe 10 years from now they'll get it.
But let's imagine that people believed in the real Santa. Let's imagine that 80% of the population of the world believed in the real Santa Claus, that there was this guy that actually flew to chimneys and went down and gave a present or whatever. Let's say that they believed in the Santa Claus, and we're telling them Santa Claus doesn't exist, but actually we tell them, oh no, we agree, Santa Claus exists, but we're not talking about the same Santa Claus as them. We're talking about the guy in the mall. So basically, it confuses things.
It's the spirit of reciprocity and gift giving.
Yeah,
it's a karmic
it allows them
behind all human beings.
It allows them to think that, oh yeah, this guy believes in Santa Claus as well. This guy believes what we believe, so it enforces their bad belief in Santa Claus.
Well, that's what we're doing with free will. People have a misconception of what free will means. We're not going to concede to them their definition because it's wrong. So in other words, just like there's a right definition or historical definition of Santa Claus and God, there's one of free will.
People believe in the free will that is incoherent, just like people believe in the God that is incoherent. So
well, no, the God that they believe in, the traditional God, is quite coherent. In other words,
no. They believe in a God that actually has.
Well, one of the traditional attributes of God is that he's timeless. So how does a timeless God do things that requires time?
How are you defining timeless?
God is atemporal. He doesn't exist from moment to moment. He's just a being that is totally he's the unmoved mover. He never changes.
Actually, in that sense, Michael, I would agree with you. I would refute that God. I would say God, exists. If there is such a thing as outside of time, for example, naturalistically before the Big Bang, then I would define God as that. But naturally, if God is everything, God has to also exist within time and space.
But so you're refuting the God that a lot of people believe in. So same thing with like all-knowing. You have a totally different conception of all-knowing than what people actually believe God has. And same thing with all-powerful. Your conception of all-powerful is completely different. People think that God could turn the moon into cheese. This is a fact.
With all-powerful, first of all, like it preceded the concept of omnipotent, which was like in the 1500s. But in other words, like those people who believed that God was all-powerful would nonetheless concede that all-powerful doesn't mean that God can do something contrary to God's nature. In other words, like they were defining God as all good, which I don't agree with, but they were saying because God is all good,
George,
God cannot do evil.
People believe that God could move the sun. That this is a fact. It's in the
God does
Bible.
move the sun. Who do
No,
you
no,
think
no.
moves the sun?
Can stop the sun. Can stop the rotation of the sun from going. Stop the rotation of the Earth from going around the
So
sun.
they got that wrong. We thought once that we were the center of the universe.
Be-
I'm not saying they get everything right.
They think that God is all powerful in that sense that He could do this. It's
Right.
not whether He did it or not is irrelevant. They think He actually has this power. He has the all powerfulness to be able to do that type of thing.
George,
Right.
do
I
you
would
believe
reject
that
that.
George, do you believe that God's will can sometimes interfere with natural law?
God's will is what makes natural law behave the way it does.
Okay, but can God simply just change his mind and say, tomorrow I'm going to make it so that E doesn't equal MC squared?
I don't think so. In other words, I don't think God can make 1 + 1 = 3. But in other words, like God could conceivably these laws of nature conceivably, theoretically, logically may not be eternal. So in other words, tomorrow we might wake up to a world where it's completely different and equal does not equal MC squared. I don't
Okay,
know. We're
so
just
do you
speculating.
believe that God ever communicates with people? Is there any revelation in your view?
I mean, if we start with the premise that we don't have a free will, everything that we ever think, say, communicate is a revelation from God because it's not coming from us.
Even mutually contradictory views?
Exactly, even completely mistaken
So
views.
why would God make lots of different billions of people have all different kinds of views on stuff that are
Because he's a
incompatible
fucking
with
idiot. Because, basically, Michael, what you're asking is why would God create? A better one is why would God create pain? You've got this being or whatever creates sentient beings like us and other animals who we like pleasure, we really dislike pain and suffering, and he makes us suffer. I can't. To me, that's vastly
Okay.
unintelligent. It makes no sense.
So in your
If
view also,
if
God made Adolf Hitler do the Holocaust, right?
Yeah.
if you polled the majority of people who believed in God and said, "Do you think God is not very smart, not unintelligent, but not very smart?" What do you think they would say on that?
I would say that they would say God is actually very, very smart. And I would say God is very, very smart, but I can't explain why he created pain.
I can because he doesn't exist. But I would like to point something out here. You said this like numerous times. You talk about which thing happens first, like a word or an idea coming into uh, use by human beings
Right.
before another word, and as if you give weight to that idea. The bad ideas come first. I don't understand why the fact that a word would come first or a bad idea would come first would make it good. It's when we work on ideas or completely abolish or remove bad ideas is
Yeah.
when the scientific uh, process starts rolling around. Like we used to have the geocentric model of the universe, pretty good, pretty scientific, not good enough. The heliocentric model explained more things. It was better at predicting the cosmos and what would happen, the seasons. It was great for almanacs. It was great for traveling. The geocentric model was pretty good, wasn't good enough, and it was false, relatively
Well,
speaking.
my
So,
answer to that,
so I
go
don't
ahead.
know why you keep on saying this thing came first. I
You
don't care
can't
what
you
word
you
came
can't
first.
apply that to everything. In some instances, you're right, Mitch. In other words, like
Some.
defining God as benevolent, as all good, omnibenevolent, that's wrong.
I'm saying the concept of God itself is the geocentric model here. That is being the idea of God itself is the geocentric model.
I
This
don't
is
understand
this
what you're
is the.
saying. What do you?
I'm saying that's the old idea, the bad idea. That's
But that's what I'm
science.
saying. You can't. I mean, in order to say it's bad, you're saying that it's
That's a
wrong.
different
And
conversation for a different.
if we go,
But
again, this depends on definition. If you're defining God as being everywhere, as creating the universe, you cannot logically or scientifically refute that.
no, what I'm saying is, imagine human civilization comes up with the geocentric model. Seems pretty good. Then they go, actually, this idea is bad. Imagine a human civilization comes up with this idea of God. Then they realize, oh wait, that's silly. All we need is science. I'm saying this is the natural progression of humankind. You see what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, like, it depends, like, again, like here in the United States, 80% of people believe in God or higher power. So, like, and again, if we're subscribing to logic and science, and logic is the fundamental, basic principle of science, without logic, there's no science, and you apply logic to the definition of God that they had several thousand years ago, you have to admit that God exists.
What?
I mean,
What? Yeah, you lost me there. Like even before the concept of God came about, it came about through like people not understanding what the sun was. Basically, they looked up at the sun and they're like, "Wow, what is that thing?" And they attributed the God qualities to the sun. And then that came up to the mythological gods, which were like the god of the sun, god of water, and all these gods that I mean, so it didn't actually come about from there being a god of the universe. It came about all these things that people just didn't know what they were. So they were like, oh, that there
it's the
must be
exact
a
same thing we do in science. We try to explain why what happens happens. They did the exact
But
same
science
thing.
is a lot. What the distinction between science and religion is this: science is about logic, reason, evidence, the scientific method. Religion comes into play because there's an element of religion that is not, and I'm being generous when I say an element of religion that is not about logic and reason. It's
Well,
about faith
I couldn't
and
agree with you
claims.
more. I
Okay, hold
couldn't,
on.
but
But my point is, there is nothing, absolutely nothing good or redeeming about religion, because what separates religion from science, the only thing that separates it, is an element, at least a few elements that are not logical and not reasonable
and
and
that's
not
why
evidence
that's
based.
why I say we need a vast
Well,
historical religious
no.
reformation.
No, we don't need an. Well, what I contend is, if religion has all these good things, if religion has some good parts, the logic, reason, evidence, whatever, but then there's the faith-based part, and that's the bad part.
So we
When you
get rid of
take,
it.
yeah, when you know what happens when you take out the faith-based part, it's not.
You get real science.
Yeah,
You get
exactly.
a scientific
You just get
religion.
science. No, you don't get a scientific religion. You just get science. The science is gone.
Well, in other
Scientology.
words,
Sorry,
here's the
the
difference
religion.
between
Sorry,
science. Here's
the
the
religion
difference
ceased.
between science and religion. Science will say, well, we don't know what happened, before the Big Bang, and maybe like we're going to just leave it there. Where religion says, well, fine, we don't know, but logic says that something must have of
No, not logic, faith. Not logic, faith. That's the
what
difference. If it were logic, you wouldn't say that because it's not
it is
logic.
logic. It is
It's not
logic
lo-
because
No, it is
basically our
not. That
logic
is not
tells us,
logic at all.
Mitch, our logic tells us that everything is cause. How are we going to
No.
say that?
I'm saying if that were logical, it wouldn't be religion. The reason the word religion is
No.
yes, hold on. The reason why the word religion even exists is because of a faith-based element. Without the faith-based element, then the word is starting to become really meaningless.
I
Because
disagree.
science is the logic, reason, evidence, science. If How could you disagree? If you make a claim that is just about logic, reason, evidence, blah blah blah, then it's science. If you make a claim that is beyond that, then there's another thing that you're using, another criterion.
I disagree.
If it's a faith-based criterion, that's usually
It
because religion
doesn't
can mean a lot of
require
things.
faith. I know. I'm saying
Well,
a
George,
lot of
hold on
religion.
now. Hold on now.
You know,
I think that your views go off the deep end once you get to the point of the infinite regress and you say, "Well, I can't explain it, but it transcends logic." To me, that is essentially waving the white flag and saying, "My views are not logical. I can't explain them, but I'm still going to believe them anyway."
But
To me,
Michael,
that's faith.
that applies to science and theology.
How? Where's the comparability in
Because
science?
in
what is your
science,
definition of science? I'm so confused.
science is a logic-based exploration of reality,
And
and
what's
actually,
religion?
well, religion, the way it should be, the way it
No.
started,
What is religion?
religion is at its best, because you could apply this to science also, there's a lot of nonsense science. At its best, religion is a logic-based exploration of reality.
What are you talking? What? Hold on. Give me those two definitions again. What are the two different definitions?
Religion, there's no two definitions. Religion at its best is a logic-based exploration of reality.
And you're saying religion and science are the exact same thing. That's what you're saying.
Yes, there's bad science, there's bad
Well,
religion.
no. Forget bad or good.
There's mistaken
If
science, there's
religion and
mistaken religion.
science, then this is just a logical problem now. If religion and science are the exact same thing, you only need one of them. So there should be. So you should say no religion. There's only science.
Science is an evolved form of religion. Religion
No, you gave
didn't.
the exact same definition. That's cheating. You gave them
It's
the
not
exact
cheating.
same definition.
Science, science evolved from religion,
No,
just like
not
chemistry evolved from
no.
alchemy.
According to your definitions, they're exactly the same. So
They are.
so now you're just cheating because
Well,
you
we're
said they
talking
were
about
the same.
different senses. They are the same.
What do you mean different? I allowed you to pick your
All right,
definition,
all right.
and you
Here's an
deliberately picked the same
explanation. Here's an
definition
explanation, Mitch.
and
All
gave
right,
no distinction whatsoever.
cells are intelligent. Single cells are intelligent. Human beings are intelligent. They're the same. It's the same intelligence. Human intelligence is vastly more complex than single cell intelligence. So, like, religion and science are the same, except science is a more complicated, sophisticated manifestation of religion.
Not good enough. Not handling it. I don't get what you're saying.
Yeah.
What is the difference between religion and science? Complication?
Essentially,
That's
all
not
right,
good.
at its best, science and religion are basically both logic-based explanations.
And what's the difference between them? What's the distinction?
The difference is that with science, we have the empirical method. We have the scientific method. We have, we have much more information to work with to arrive at our truth.
So what does religion lack?
Information and
What kind of information?
scientific information.
I don't understand. George, you're
words,
not
like,
really making any sense right now.
I am
You're
making
saying
sense.
science. No, you're not. You're saying science and religion are the same thing, but science has the scientific method, but religion doesn't, which means
Yes,
they're
because
not.
I'm saying they're
That's
the same
illogical.
thing because I'm saying they're the same thing.
You just said
because
one
they're
has
both-
more than the
Mitch,
other.
I'm
So then they're
saying
not.
they're the same thing in the sense that both are based on logic, but
How are they
science,
different?
they're different
Explicitly.
because, like, at the
Explicitly,
time,
how are they different?
I'm
Hold on,
telling
hold on.
you, at the time religion was, came about, we didn't have the instrumentation to be able to replicate and to determine, through the scientific method, for example, what was actual and what was not. We didn't have the sophistication of our knowledge or the technology that we use in science today to determine more precisely the nature of reality.
George, are you saying that religion was the child and science is the adult that grew out of the child, which is religion?
That sounds good.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like you're saying that at the time religion was the best way people knew how to explain things, and now they simply have more information. And some people are holding on to the traditional ideas, the much older ideas, and we're calling that religion. But these new things that are being discovered, that's being called science, but in a way they're similar. They're kind of the same thing.
Exactly. The major difference between too much of religion and science is that science will base, our conclusions on what's logical, what's verifiable, what's demonstrable according to the evidence. Whereas in conventional religion, again, that permeates too much of it, is like these guys say, well, religion says that something is true or accurate or a valid description of reality because some guy 1,000 years ago says it is, which I could completely reject. It made sense to them, but like our science is vastly more accurate.
Why don't you just call your views, George, metaphysics, and why do you have to call it religion?
Define the distinction between metaphysics and religion.
Well, religions are metaphysical views, but metaphysics is basically your worldview and how you understand the fundamental nature of reality.
Well, then how are you differentiating metaphysics from science?
Well, science is an epistemology. It's a methodology for finding truth about reality.
All right, so how would metaphysics not apply a scientific method to it then?
A metaphysical worldview could apply scientific reasoning within it, but religion doesn't. I mean, if religion doesn't apply scientific type of reasoning. It doesn't have hypothesis. It doesn't use empirical evidence. There's no peer review process or anything like that. There's no falsification standard that you can have in religion. So, and to me, it's like, why even use
Well,
raining. These clouds are raining on us, right? So something's causing the rain. We're going to cause whatever, we're going to call whatever causes the rain god, right? And then they kind of like some god, someday, you know, they didn't have rain for, let's say, a couple of weeks, right? And then some guy starts dancing around and he says, you know, I'm going to make it rain by dancing, right? And perhaps it's a complete coincidence, right? But this guy dances, the next day it rains, and they say, oh my God, we can influence this rain by dancing. It's a logical conclusion. It might be ultimately
do
mistaken.
you want to hear? I know an anecdote related to that, really quick. Do you know why the American Indian rain dance always worked?
No.
Because they wouldn't stop dancing until it rained.
Very good. but can you see that as mistaken as it might be, based on more evidence, that it's a logical conclusion, however much mistaken it was?
Well, no, given what we know about the world, we know it's not logical.
Well, it's not logical anymore. At the time, I guess that was the best logical methodology they had. Logic has improved, you know, throughout history. I think that's what George is saying is science is kind of a logical methodology that's kind of been improved upon. And back then they didn't have that type of.
And actually, I don't think our logic has improved. Our information has improved.
No, our logic has too. I mean,
well, if our logic had improved that much, I mean, come on, this free will thing we're leading the world to, it is a no-brainer. I mean, come on. So we're determining the nature of our reality not from simple logic, but from who knows what.
Well, I agree it's because of strong personal bias. I don't think it's because I think people who are smart enough to understand the issue, people who've investigated it, they just have a really, really strong bias. They really want it.
Hey guys, I have a suggestion. Now, this episode is getting extremely long, but we've raised an interesting question. What the real difference is between science and religion, and we could discuss that in a whole episode by itself about the compatibility or incompatibility between science and religion.
Sure.
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah, because that definitely seems to be a hot topic of debate in this episode, as well as the Santa Claus thing. That was hilarious, guys.
I'm afraid I've got some bad news for Mitch, man. I'll let you know after the podcast is over.
What?
Hey, this is getting crazy. So, hey, Mitch, would you be willing to write the title and description of this episode we're doing here? Because I don't know how to describe it.
Sure.
All right, excellent. So, how do you want to close out this episode?
Oh, so yeah, this has been Free Will, Science and Religion with Mike Walsh, Chandler Klebs, Slattery, George Ortega, Nick Vale, and myself. We've had a contentious but friendly argument about what kind of perspective on reality is compatible with this rejection of free will, and we've gone back and forth between more pantheistic, more nuanced viewpoints about God, and the simple naturalist, materialist, atheist perspective on reality, and I think we got nowhere. So
Sounds good.